What's up, everybody? I was planning to do a video on the Ark of the Covenant at some point, and I guess this is that point because they've made a exact replica of it. And I've heard several people say a life-size replica of it, but this is actually a miniature, and there are actually some engineering problems with building this to spec out of solid gold as described in the Torah. One of the crazier details about this is it was housed at Mar-a-Lago for several months, which brings up some interesting thoughts in my mind, but we'll get to that. They've recently been touring the Holy Land with this, and the timing of this is a little bit suspect because as of October of last year, they had several red heifers that were qualified for the red heifer sacrifice, and officially they haven't performed this ritual yet. Which, by the way, that sacrifice is supposed to bring on the end of days and the 7 years of tribulation. But over the course of the last year, there have been some changes, like people praying openly at the Temple Mount, which is actually illegal, both in secular and God's law. Since the Temple Mount belongs to the Muslims, secular authorities have made it illegal to pray there to keep tensions low. And according to God's law, you have to perform the red heifer sacrifice in order to be ritualistically pure enough to go on the Temple Mount. And then there's the question of what was the ark anyway? Yeah, it's said to have contained the 2 tablets that God carved the original 10 commandments in and gave to Moses. I believe Aaron's staff is in there, and I think something else. But it's also described as pretty much a communication device in some areas and as a weapon in others, which, if you've seen my other videos on Yahweh, is kind of an appropriate gift. I'll explain that for new people in a minute. So here's what they say about this ark. And don't worry, I'll fill in the bits that they don't mention here. So first off, the chief architect decided to remain anonymous out of this. I don't know why. But it took him and 17 volunteers 3.5 years to build this replica, which is made out of donated gold and some 3 tons of Egyptian acacia wood. You guys see those 2 poles there? Those are made out of acacia wood. What happened to the other 2.99 tons? I don't know. Artists got to eat too, I guess. Speaking of donated gold, did you know that the original ark was built out of donated gold? Yeah, after Yahweh performed all of his miracles to free the Hebrews from the Egyptians, especially after all of their firstborn sons were off, yeah, they just started throwing money and clothing and anything they had of value at the Hebrews, telling them, here, just take it and go. So yeah, technically the original ark was built out of donated gold too. And I might as well get this out of the way for the new people. I always have to tiptoe around this a little bit, but here it is. The miracles of Jesus were healing the sick, curing the blind, feeding the hungry, casting out demons, doing all these things that really helped people. The miracles of Yahweh were turning the rivers to blood, a plague of frogs, gnats, flies, getting the livestock sick, boils, hail, locusts, darkness, and then finally offing every firstborn son in the nation. So does anybody see a difference between the miracles of Jesus and the miracles of Yahweh? Yes. But if you grew up Christian like me, you're trained to ignore these differences. And the preacher will just tell you, well, it was a different time. I'm not really in the mood to sugarcoat things right now, so I'll make this as quick and painless as possible. Would it be the worst thing that you ever learned in your life to find out that the God of the Old Testament was not the Father that Jesus was talking about? Well, a lot of people never actually read the Old Testament, but there is nothing spiritual about it. There is nothing moral about it. There's nothing about the afterlife. It's just blind obedience to this entity that does all of these horrific things. And I've got a whole playlist here that you should check out. And if you actually look at all of the things that Yahweh did, do these sound like the things that a loving creator of all the universe would do? Or does it sound like something a demonic tyrant would do after promising these people, the Hebrews, that they would be rich beyond measure, rulers of the world, as long as they swear blind obedience to anything that Yahweh says? And this Yahweh is a war god. He sent an angel to off 185,000 Assyrians while they slept. And even King David, who was his boy, well, he tricked David into numbering his army, which was a big no-no. But then once he did, he offed 70,000 of David's men, his own people, the chosen ones. So who is it that usually comes along and offers you wealth and power and all of the material delights of the world? Well, you know the answer. It's just a matter of whether or not you can break through your indoctrination. The simple truth is the Church of Rome, now the Catholic Church, which literally means the universal church, couldn't justify things like the Crusades, which were just mercenary wars of attrition, if they just worshipped a peace-loving hippie like Jesus. So they slapped the warlording Yahweh of the Old Testament on the front of the New Testament to justify their quest for secular power in this world. And here's a playlist of 21 videos to that effect for anybody who wants to hear it. So back to this replica ark, it was made out of donated gold just like the original. And apparently a couple artists built them a new house out of acacia woods because 3 tons? I don't know if I used that much wood on one house. But don't care, giving a speech here, says, quote, "Building the ark is the ultimate journey. It is the ultimate pilgrimage to discover God and to discover the gray people." There's certain people that can't be mentioned on here, so I just say gray. And that pilgrimage was both horrifying and satisfying. We went with the highest purity of gold available to the Egyptians. The purity used for royal artifacts is around 23.75 carats, which pure gold is 24 carats. And in appropriate overthinking things fashion, a lot of the concepts or motives that we use follow up either Kabbalistic or some other concept by way of numerology. The math parallels the ones found both in the tabernacle and the first temple. They use the same kind of numerology, both of which no longer exist. And by the way, the ark was last seen at the destruction of the first temple before the Babylonian captivity. So I just want to point out that Yahweh comes along and says, hey, I'm going to free you from the Egyptians and take you up to the promised land. When they get there, they find a land of giants. Now, we're told it's because these were the Nephilim. Nephilim are bad. Don't worry about it, which in modern times has been turned into genetic manipulation. But not only were these sons of Anak giants, but all of the fruits were too. It seemed like they were living pretty well in harmony with the land. It took 2 men to carry a bunch of grapes on a stick. Now, the scouts went out and they scoped out the land of Canaan. They saw these giants. They saw the giant fruits and everything. They came back and told everybody in the camp that they were scared because these people were huge. Well, Yahweh offed those scouts on the spot. How dare you question my authority? Eventually, he offed everyone over 21 years of age, right around there, and everyone under 21 years of age had to wander the desert for 40 years. All because they second-guessed Yahweh, because he promised them the promised land, and they got there, and there were already people in the promised land. So this is like me promising you a new Corvette, and then when we get over there, there's somebody sitting in it, and I say, well, okay, yeah, it's actually his right now, but you just go off him, and then you can have the Corvette. That's exactly what happened here. So eventually, Yahweh smites all the sons of Anak, and then the Hebrews are allowed to take over this land. They keep parts of it for a couple hundred years, and then the Babylonians come over and wipe them out and take them all into captivity. So I'm sorry, but doesn't this sound a little bit like our modern conception of Satan promising you all of these big things and then kind of tricking you at every turn? Here we are supposedly 3,000 years later, and they finally regained the Holy Land through more trickery and deception. And really, this ark commemorates all of that trickery and deception. This was Yahweh promising that you will be masters of this world if you do exactly what I say, which always ended in a lot of bloodshed. Now, they pointed out in the article that they had a hard time making this to spec because you see these gold rings here that the acacia wood poles slide through. Well, gold isn't very strong, but it is really heavy. So this tiny miniature of an ark that only weighs about 85 pounds can barely be lifted by those gold rings attached to it. So just an interesting point there. Now, I've talked about this part in past videos, what they call the glory of God. This is some kind of power akin to radiation, in my opinion, and some type of radiative energy. Now, what we're looking at here is a motif to the pillar of cloud by day and pillar of fire by night from Exodus. When they left Egypt, Yahweh would go out in front of them, and the line was so long that nobody could see the front of it. They could just see this big pillar of cloud by day and pillar of light by night. Eventually, they would make the tabernacle, and Yahweh's glory would descend and enter the tabernacle at night, where special priests would feed him. They'd make burnt offerings. He just breathes in the smoke, and I guess that's how he eats. What they call God's glory is some type of energy. So the priests had to wear bells so that Yahweh would know not to open the door when they were inside, because there were a couple of chambers inside of there. And this thing was built like a hyperbaric chamber. It was very specific with like 2 or 3 layers, and the outside layer was lambskin coated in oil. So it was literally a hyperbaric chamber. And Yahweh literally tells them to wear bells, because if I open the door and you're inside, you're goner. This is seconded in a completely unrelated verse. When they came to the threshing floor of Nacon, Uzzah reached out and took hold of the ark of God because the oxen stumbled. The Lord's anger burned against Uzzah because of his irreverent act. Therefore, God struck him down, and he died there beside the ark. Now, this is one of King David's men, and he was upset at Yahweh for striking him down. But I don't think it was the intentional wrath of Yahweh. I think it was his glory that was stored in the ark. Forget what you think you know about glory. It's a power, and it's something akin to radiation. When you go to get an x-ray, what do? They put a lead jacket over your chest to protect you. Well, gold is even thicker and denser than the lead, so it's a better protection against this glory. And the ark is storing an immense amount of this glory, so if you touch it, you get fried. That's why they had to take wooden poles and stick them through to be able to carry it. And those are plated in gold for an extra layer of protection. And really, when you get down to it, any sacrifices made to Yahweh had to be perfect, without blemish, especially no yeast. It says that every other line in the Bible, no frickin' yeast, man. But before a burnt offering would be accepted, they had to come in and sprinkle some of the blood on a golden altar so that it could be tested by Yahweh to make sure there's nothing in there that's going to harm him if he eats it. Even the high priest, the only one that actually enters into the Holy of Holies, has to wear this special gold-plated chest protector, which is an extra layer of protection for his vital organs. And then he has to wear, and all the priests have to wear these really thick robes and then anoint them with oil. So if you've ever wondered where this anointing comes from, slathering somebody with oil, it's for a radioactive glory protection. And they have to be barefoot to stay grounded. So I know I'm kind of dumping a lot out there right now, but if you get it, you get it. The ark had to be made out of gold for the same reason that you wear a lead vest during x-rays. I guess he had to do something special with Moses, because up on Mount Sinai, he wanted to see God's face, and God said, no, it would off you, so why don't you hide in this crack in a rock, and I'll put my hand over it, and I'll walk by. Well, after he did this, Moses comes down the mountain, and he is glowing. Everyone is afraid of him and staying away from him. They see that he is full of the, quote, glory of God. Also, inside of the tabernacle, he instructs them to make special curtains, and on these curtains to sew in these winged figures. Some of these are winged humanoids, and some of them are winged beasts. And the Western world had no idea about the Sumerian culture until like 150 years ago. So people have been reading the Bible supposedly for 2,000 years and had no idea that what is being described in there is exactly what you find in Sumer. So Yahweh tells them to hammer out the same winged creatures for cherubim on top of the ark, with their wings pointing towards each other. Now you've got this energy source inside of a gold box that's containing all of it, but what is this powering? There above the cover between the 2 cherubim that are over the ark of the covenant law, I will meet with you and give you all of my commands for the Yeezys. So you guys remember Indiana Jones and the Raiders of the Lost Ark? In there, they refer to the ark as a radio to God. And they weren't just making that up. There are multiple verses in the Bible saying that I will meet you in between the 2 wings of the cherubim on top of the ark and give you my instructions. So this was literally a communication device on one hand, and in my opinion, technological in nature. Now, I know for some people that means space aliens, but for me, not necessarily. I still think that there may be an entire race of beings living inside of the Earth, and it doesn't have to be a hollow Earth for that to be the case. Right now, we have the technology to go down and hollow out huge chambers and put everything in there that is needed for life. And when you get into the story of Agartha and all of these inner Earth beings, that's exactly what they say. Like, I think they say like 20,000 years ago, there was an imminent catastrophe and they all moved inside of the Earth. So me saying it was technological in nature doesn't necessarily mean aliens. It's just more advanced beings than humans were a couple thousand years ago. Just like in Hinduism, where you have the concept of flying chariots, here is a coin from apparently the 4th century BC depicting Yahweh on a winged chariot. Now, I find this particularly interesting because commandment number 2 makes clear in no uncertain terms, thou shalt not make unto thee any graven image or any likeness of anything that is in heaven above, or that is in the earth beneath, or that is in the water underneath the earth. Thou shalt not bow down to thyself to them, nor serve them. So it is expressly clear that you shall not make any graven image, but here's this coin with Yahweh graven into it. I'm trying not to sidetrack too far, but if you want more on that, go check out Myth Vision podcast. And this was just completely coincidental that they have the exact same coin on there. I didn't realize it was in their video. But it turns out that there's all kinds of evidence of the Babylonian exile, and it would appear that the Hebrews had no knowledge of Moses or Aaron or any of Yahweh's commandments. Eating pigs, because, yeah, there were pig bones found in the Hebrew quarter of Babylonia. But this is just some of the evidence, and there's much more out there, that the ancient Hebrews had absolutely no knowledge of the Old Testament that we know. Some of this evidence is as recent as the time of Christ. So I think Yahweh was one of the old gods, not the God. And here he is portrayed in a flying chariot, just like other cultures portrayed the ancient gods in flying chariots. They even got winged angels accompanying. But the way that I see things is Yahweh was the last of the ancient gods to still be in contact with mankind. All of them disappeared to somewhere abruptly, nobody knows where. Then after all of them are gone, Yahweh appears to the ancient Hebrews and says, I am the true God, the God of your fathers, but they knew me by a different name. I don't like that name anymore. I want to be called Yahweh for now and forever. And apparently he wasn't too good with names because he had them inscribe the names of the 12 tribes on the chest plate of the priest. If you've actually read the Old Testament, he tends to disappear for a few hundred years and then show up all of a sudden. And it's kind of hard to remember all that after 400 years. Okay, back on point. About time, right? With this replica, they say when we finally got the Torah delivered to us, it was a special Greek scroll. When that Torah was put in, this ark became weaponized. This is the modern replica that they have right now that they're marching all over Yeezy. So they would carry this ark into battle with them, and that reminds me, I got to look up the Incas. They used to carry an ark around with their god, who was a war god that would instruct them. Anyway, let me try to stay on point for once. When the Hebrews went up against the city of Jericho, they marched around the city 7 times with the ark, and then after the 7th one, they all sounded their trumpets, and the walls came tumbling down. Many people attribute this to the power that was contained in the ark, the glory that I keep saying there's something to that glory. In another battle, the Philistines captured the ark, and it says that God struck down 70 of them because they looked into the ark. Well, once again, like Uzzah earlier, accidentally touching the ark, and it struck him down. It sounds like the Philistines, somebody cracked the lid open, and 70 people were around, and it took all of them out. So I think the original ark held part of God's glory, some radioactive type energy that is probably unknown to us, but it may be closer to radioactive than I'm giving it credit for, because there have been stories of people getting cataracts in their eyes because of this, and some of the old Hindu legends of the weapons of the gods that caused their hair to fall out, and it sounded a lot like radiation poisoning, which may or may not be the same power source behind God's glory. The use of gold here may be more practical than ornamentational for the same reason that you wear a lead jacket when getting x-rays. The original ark was used as a communication device. That part is actually pretty clear and even very specific. It says, I will meet with you between the two wings of the cherub on top of the ark. And I've got some other interesting information about the ancient gods communicating with humans through certain methods, but I'm not ready to reveal that little nugget yet. But unless this Torah that they put inside of this replica has been touched by the hand of God, and I'm pretty sure it hasn't, then I don't think it's been energized with God's glory to be used as a communication device or a weapon. I personally think that people at the top, especially the Talmudic side of things, know exactly what I've just told you about all this, but that all of the Torah reading grays have been conned just like Christians on this story. I don't think it's so much the word of God that powered this like they believe. I think it was actual objects that had been in close proximity to God that powered this. But who knows? Maybe it's the word of God that made all those pagers explode. If you know, you know. That's enough out of me. I'll catch you guys on the next one. Hope you enjoyed it. Static out.